Ah, The Sims, such a fascinating and unique experience. With the recent release of the Legacy Collection on multiple digital platforms, finally, I figured this was a great time to talk about the original Sims game, my memories with it, and all of its quirks. The original game came out in the year 2000, and given that there are still few to no other games like it out now, at least as of the making of this video, you can probably imagine just how unique and special it was 25 years ago. We got our first PC in 1998, and over the next few years I started getting really into simulation games. Stuff like Roller Coaster Tycoon and SimCity 3000, both of which were just awesome. And being a kid who mostly played console games at the time, these simulation games with sandbox elements were really intriguing to me. Not that there weren't simulation games on consoles, but they were rarer, and I didn't personally know about a lot of them. Even my mom, who was not super into video games, started getting absolutely hooked on these simulation games. So much so that she eventually got me my own PC. I think this was around 2001, so we could both play games all we wanted. And The Sims was a big factor in this. Anyway, getting back to the year 2000, I was around 12 at the time, and my two earliest memories of The Sims are seeing a promotional poster stand up outside of an electronics boutique at the mall we frequented, and this little promo on the back of my SimCity 3000 jewel case. And I specifically remember looking at this jewel case over and over and wondering how it worked. I figured it was sort of like SimCity, but you could zoom in further to see inside the houses and stuff. I didn't really know what to expect, but the idea of seeing all of the furniture in the houses intrigued me. So we got a copy of The Sims, and oh boy, what an absolute ride it was. Sadly, I got rid of most of the boxes for my big box PC games at some point, but as an adult, I rebought some, and this was at the top of my list. I remember inspecting every screenshot here and reading over all the stuff, getting super hyped to play this game. Back then, boxes and manuals were hype machines because between car rides home and installation times on PC games, you had all sorts of time to look over all of this stuff, and look over it I did. I think even as I was reading this and looking over the screenshots, I don't think I actually had a really good understanding of what the game would be like. It really was just such a unique experience back then. But with the screenshots of the different houses and the pool tables and the hot tubs and all this stuff, I was just getting so excited. By the time the game was ready, my brain was overflowing with possibilities, and then watching the intro movie and seeing everything in action with movement and sound was just amazing. Now sadly, when you launch the Legacy Collection, this intro movie doesn't play, but man, I wish they would include it. It is just such a great way to get excited about the game, I think. It's also funny because it's got a few things that I'm guessing are maybe from an earlier build of the game that didn't make it into the final game. Very cool stuff. But yeah, let's jump right in. And here we are in the main neighborhood. Oh, so much nostalgia, and let's just take a minute to listen to this amazing music. Now, if that is not absolute vibes, I don't know what is. Now, to be honest, I really wanted to include some footage of just the base game neighborhood of The Sims 1, but I'm honestly not sure it's worth the effort trying to get an installation of the base game working just for a few seconds of footage, since I do want to talk about the expansions in this video. So instead, we're going to use the magical power of editing to simulate the old neighborhood view in all of its glory. Ta-da! So yeah, in the base game, only the top right portion of the neighborhood was playable, and there were not multiple neighborhoods or locations. It was pretty basic. More neighborhoods were added through the Live in Large and House Party expansions. They all had the same layout as the first neighborhood, and the second one had a few new houses and the legendary Meshuggah family. The other 6 neighborhoods were blank canvases for your creativity, which I certainly used as a kid, but honestly, I spent most of my time in the first 2 neighborhoods. The Unleashed expansion, which focused on pets and farming, added this huge area here called Old Town, which is repeated in all of the other neighborhoods. We'll get to the other areas you can go to a little bit later, but for now, I just want to focus on the neighborhood. In particular, I want to take a closer look at Neighborhood 1. Our first stop here is the Newbie family. This, to me, is the most iconic Sims 1 family and house. It acts as a sort of tutorial, and they sort of teach you how to play here. And to occupy the house, we have Bob and Betty Newby, who get to enjoy this cozy little place. I always particularly loved their backyard. I don't know what it is. It's a combination of things, probably the tile and the fountain, the little chairs pointing towards the fountain. I don't know, I find it very relaxing back here. Also in the neighborhood, we've got the Goth family, which most people who played any Sims game will probably recognize. In this game, the Goth family is made up of Mortimer, Bella, and their daughter Cassandra, who's a child. Their house is actually quite small, and they don't have a ton of money to expand it, which is funny because I always associate the Goths with being super rich, but I think I'm thinking of The Sims 2. They only have an outdoor dining area, but there's no weather in The Sims 1, so I guess that's okay. And of course, they have quite a populated graveyard. Also, funny story, I was playing the Goth family a bit as I was getting footage for the video, and while cooking, Bella started a fire, but they don't have a fire alarm apparently. Also, the phone to call emergency services is right next to the stove, so calling the fire department was risky. But no one was hurt, and I did install a fire alarm afterwards. But yeah, if you play the Goth family, watch out for that. Or, just let things happen, I guess. The newbies and the Goths are the only families that have homes in the base game, but there are a few families in the bin that you can place down in an existing home or build a home for. We have the Pleasant family consisting of Jeff, Diane, and their children Daniel and Jennifer, whom I never noticed before but have an alliterative name to the parent of opposite gender. Huh, that's kinda neat. They sort of remind me of The Simpsons. They're just giving that traditional American TV family vibe. The Roomies household consisting of Chris and Melissa Roomie, and Michael Batchelor. Taking a look at the Old Town area, here we have quite a few more families. There's the Cat family, which is made up of Ginia and her cats, Waggles, Boots, Scout, and Maggie, and it looks like she has an empty bird cage. Yeah, that's a pretty cute house. Next we have the Burb family, which is made up of Brad, Tiffany, Johnny, and their pup, Tucker. I love the little doghouse in the yard. It's got an upstairs, and in the backyard they have like a little bit of an orchard with a little farm as well. Pretty cool stuff. Next is the Charming family, which is made up of Claire and her pup Luna, and I really like this house. It reminds me a bit of the Newbie house, but a little bit fancier. I love the lake in the back, and it has some really nice color themes going on. I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever played this household, ever, but looking at the house and stuff, it just makes me want to play it. I'll have to come back to it. Next, we've got the Goth Senior family, which is made up of Gunther, Cornelia, and their two cats, Hecuba and Menelaus. And they are supposed to be the parents of Mortimer Goth. I say supposed to be because in The Sims 1, you can't really establish family connections, so it's all kind of either in your head or in the family description. And their house is massive, by far the biggest, fanciest house of any of the families in the game. I mean, they have a piano room and a separate sunroom for their bird cage. They have a bathroom and a separate toilet room inside their bathroom. That's the fanciest thing I've ever seen. They also have a separate room for their cats. And of course, like any good Goth family, they also have a pretty big graveyard. Down here we have the Hick family, made up of Mama, Eldon, and 3 dogs, Bobo, Duke, and Leroy. This is a fun one. It's supposed to be a trailer home, and the stove and pinball machines in the yard always crack me up. And that's the last family in the neighborhood. But even though we're focusing on Neighborhood 1, I have to introduce the Meshuggah family from Neighborhood 2. They're the only other family in the game, so it would be rude to leave them out, especially since they're so interesting. So the Meshuggahs are made up of Frankie and Sylvia Marie, and they have what is easily the most unhinged house of any family. It's a pink octagon with mismatched windows, a yard with scattered topiaries and pink flamingos. The inside is divided into 4 rooms, a bathroom, a bedroom with the vibrating heart bed of course, a dining room kitchen, and a living room. The color and furniture choices are absolutely wild. So much animal print. I love it. It's a very memorable home. And I think that's all the families, at least all the playable ones. There are of course NPCs and townies and celebrities and all that kind of stuff, but we won't get into all of that right now. I just wanted to add some sort of introduction to the neighbors we'll be encountering. Now I'm not going to go into every empty home and talk about it, but the one I do want to point out is 2 Sim Lane, which in the base game was what I always referred to as the mansion. Your new Sims always start off with 20,000 simoleons, and this thing costs over 50,000. So my goal was to make a Sim that could earn enough money to afford this place, and it was such a fun time trying to accomplish that, because earning that much money and having your Sim survive long enough to use it when you have no idea what you're doing, like me when I was 12, and even now, is actually really tough in this game. But yeah, look at this place. It's massive, and it has no furniture, so you also needed to have enough money to actually be able to furnish it. I actually remember playing my Sim for so long that I got a little congratulations screen that only popped up when you played a given family for 100 days. I remember being super excited that I got that. It's a really neat little detail. And with that, I think our neighborhood tour comes to an end. Now we're acquainted with everyone, and it's time to move in. Alright, let's take a look at the Sim creation here. Now, compared to any other game in the series, this is super limited. You can only choose if you're making a child or an adult Sim. You can change the gender, you can change the skin tone, you can change the head, which some heads have hats and some heads have glasses, and that's the only way that you can alter those kinds of things. And you can change the body, and similarly to the head, that's the only way to determine if your Sim is a little bit skinnier or a little bit chubbier. So if you like a particular piece of clothing but you want your Sim to have more of a belly, you're out of luck. So obviously not nearly as much customization as you have in later entries, but for the time, this was awesome. And what I will say in its defense is that you can make some pretty different looking Sims here. It's really hard to recreate your exact vision for a character than in later Sims games, but in spite of that, I never really feel like all of my Sims look the same in this game, and I never feel like I truly run out of options. So I don't know, I still think it's pretty fun, but yeah, you should know what you're getting into here. You also make the personality for each Sim using a set number of points that you can distribute. The more points you put into a given personality trait, the stronger that trait becomes. So if you put a lot of points into neat, they will do more autonomous cleaning and keeping things tidy, etc. You can also not distribute every point. If you just want to make someone who is a slob, super mean, serious, lazy, and a bit of a loner, for example. It's a pretty cool system, and I think it works fairly well. So when you make a Sim, or if you choose one from the bin, you can then move them into the neighborhood. You can choose a pre-built house and move in there as long as you can afford it, or you can build your own on an empty lot. Now, full disclosure, I have not built a home in this game in many, many years, so I don't know how this is gonna go, but no, it's really not that bad. So from the perspective of someone who's either never played The Sims 1 but maybe has played later entries, or someone like me who has played Sims 1 but hasn't played it in a really long time, I think the biggest thing to get used to here is the 2D camera, and just having more limited angles from which you can see the house. The rest of the building tools are pretty easy to use, honestly. If anything, the building system might be easier to use than later entries, probably because of the limitations. So you lay out the walls, and there are a lot of options for flooring and wallpapers to choose from, but I really miss the categories from The Sims 4. I just wish it was easier to find like wooden flooring mostly. The furniture is where you really feel it. It feels way more limited, much more so than the wall and floor options. Not only are there way less of any given piece of furniture to choose from, but they also have no color variation at all, so what you see is what you get. But I do love the pre-rendered look of the houses and furniture. It gives an almost timeless vibe for me. The Sims 1 is a funny game because the amount of furniture options is so limited that I think there's this almost linear path of progress, unless you use the money cheats, of course. And I think it's one of those situations where most players start with similar looking things like small homes and same starter toilet, etc., and slowly diverge as their Sims earn money into more and more different styles. Of course, I'm oversimplifying things with that statement, and there's always the themed stuff to break it up, like the Roman toilet. But I feel like in this game, if I ever say the starter toilet, or the expensive toilet, or the golden toilet, people who play will know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that's not as much of a thing in future sim games because of the greater variety and the color and material variations. I'm not sure why I decided to use toilets for the example, but yeah, here we are. At least for me, it almost feels like in this game individual pieces of furniture attain an almost personality, and maybe even a legendary status. Some of these pieces of furniture are just so memorable and nostalgic for me, and I wonder if folks who played this back in the day feel the same. Like, I especially remember this moose head so well. And I always wanted to make my Sims rich back in the day and be able to afford the train set, the pool table, a hot tub, and this leather couch. If I could get all of that, I felt like my Sim really made it. Makes me wonder what other players saw as their status items, if you will. And of course, with the addition of the expansion packs and more items becoming available, the list of my personal status items expanded. The Live in Large expansion added Servo, the robot butler who would clean, water your flowers, and make dinner, and just be awesome. I also have a very specific memory from my childhood. At one point, I moved into the mansion, and I decided to make a secondary building here on this lot. And while I don't remember it exactly, and I don't have any screenshots of it, I think it sort of looked something like this. It was really fun doing this and trying to think back at what it might have looked like. Like I said, it has been years since I played The Sims 1, and it's been about 25 years since I played it a lot and made a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to remember for this video. But yeah, fun times. I'm glad to have this game easily accessible again. And I have to say, building in this game is still surprisingly fun. As a longtime simmer, I wasn't sure how I would feel after spending so much time in the later games with all the fancy new building tools and options, but this is fun. Yeah, it's limited. You can only build 2-floor homes, no basements, basic roof options, etc. My biggest complaint is I wish the wallpapers and the flooring were better organized. But yeah, it's just fun. The absolute wonderful music definitely helps. I just love this game's soundtrack so much, and I can't help but relax and chill out as I decorate to these tunes. So the core gameplay of The Sims 1 is more or less what you'd expect if you played any of the other games in the main series. You click around and give your Sim orders that they usually follow, and your Sims have needs, and in order to fulfill those needs, you need stuff, most of the time at least, which means you need to work to earn money. And outside of the home building, that's the game really. You try to keep up with their needs while also imposing your own vision of what their fate should be. Really unique back when it came out, and still compelling to this day, if you ask me. One thing about the first game though is I do feel like my Sims' needs drain faster, which makes them a bit harder to manage, especially in a larger family. On the flip side, I think because there's just less for the Sims to really do, I find that they do a pretty decent job taking care of themselves, mostly. They're really bad at maintaining any kind of real schedule, so if you want them to actually go to work or school, you do have to pay attention, otherwise they'll stay up till 5 AM, wake up at 1 PM, and make meals every hour and a half. Yeah, I didn't remember this being the case, but I find that the Sims eat a lot in this game. Or rather, a lot more than in The Sims 4. Sometimes in 4, my Sims can get away with 1 meal a day, which admittedly is a bit alarming. But here, I've had my Sims eat 5 or 6 times in one day, and if there's food out, they'll gladly go again. But I shouldn't be food shaming them. I just find that they eat a lot more than in later games, that's all. So in the base game, you couldn't leave your home lot, and while your Sims could go to work and school, you couldn't follow them. They just carpool away while you wait. At the time, this really wasn't a huge complaint I had or anything, but I think if I was just playing the Sims 1 base game today, I could see getting kind of bored fast. Luckily, with the Legacy Collection, we have all the expansions installed, which really adds a lot. You can visit Old Town, Downtown, Studio Town, all the towns. You can also take your Sims on vacation, get some family pets, go on dates, and become a celebrity, or a wizard, no big deal. Yeah, that last one is a little strange, but we'll get to that, don't worry. The thing that really blew my mind a bit, coming back to this game after so many years, was that there are no days of the week. If you had asked me before picking up the Legacy Collection if The Sims 1 had days of the week, I would have said yeah, for sure. But nope, I guess that got added in The Sims 2. Funny the things you forget. Of course, it all came back to me as I started playing because of going to work. Since there are no days of the week, your Sims work and go to school every single day without any kind of sick or vacation time, which sounds awful. But here's the thing, they made it so that if you miss 2 days of work in a row, your Sim gets fired. But if you skip work every other day, you don't have any consequences. When I saw that there were no days of the week, I immediately remembered this little strategy, which can help make the most of your time since there's quite a lot to do with all the expansions installed. As I was playing the game, I was also just being bombarded with nostalgia. It's funny the way sound can be so nostalgic. There's a couple of sounds in this game that trigger a very visceral nostalgia within me, like the whistling of the newspaper girl, or the sound effect of an item breaking down. I love this game. If you're playing it for the first time, or if you're coming back after many, many years, I think what you'll find is the biggest limiting factor is your Sims needs. Funnily enough, I never really had an issue with it back in the day. Only now, returning to it after so many other Sims games, do I feel like they drain quickly and stress me out a bit. So it may just take a little time to get acclimated to this if you're coming from the other Sims games. And while, again, I think the base game experience might get a little stale, you've got all the expansions and there is just so much to do, so I think the gameplay holds up really well. Alright, so I've talked about some of the expansion content already, but now let's go through each one and give just a summary of what you can expect from each pack. The first expansion pack to be released was Live Enlarge, which added a bunch of stuff, but with no particular theme or central idea, which makes it pretty unique in the expansion pack world of The Sims. It was mostly focused on expanding the base game experience. It added some new career tracks like Paranormal and Hacker, the option to woohoo for the first time in the series, or Play in Bed as it was called here, the ability to have multiple neighborhoods, which was super needed, along with the lovely Meshuggah family, of course. It also came with some new objects and NPCs that would become super iconic to the franchise over the years, like the Grim Reaper, the Tragic Clown, the Genie, who I'm trying to remember but I don't think is in The Sims 4. I'm not sure. He's definitely in 2 and maybe in 3. Anyway, and of course, we also got my personal favorite, Servo. I mentioned Servo earlier, but I really love this robot so much, and to this day remains one of my most nostalgic pieces in The Sims 1. I particularly like how he gets different hats for different jobs, like the maid headband when cleaning, chef hat when cooking, and the little gardening hat when he cares for the flowers. Adorable. I also really love the science table where your Sims can make potions with some really weird effects, and the woodworking table where they can make some pretty mysterious little garden gnomes. Also, I was looking through the list of added items since there's no real indicator in-game, and I guess the telescope was added in Live Enlarge, complete with chances of getting abducted by aliens, of course. That's something I really thought was in the base game, but I must be thinking of The Sims 2 again. It's actually kind of crazy how much Live Enlarge added that has become super iconic for the series. The second pack was House Party, and this one was, as the name implies, all about throwing parties in your house. You could buy these giant fake cakes and entertainers would come out of them, which I always got a kick out of. Also, depending on whether your party was good or bad, Drew Carey or a mime will come over respectively. At least for me, it's always super weird when there are real life celebrities in these games. I never really got used to that, but you know, maybe it's just me. I really liked some of the new objects added by this pack, like the mechanical bull and the campfire. I also enjoyed the new building themes. In my youth, I was particularly drawn to the Hawaiian tiki theme. It looked really neat, but honestly, I don't think I got a ton more out of this pack back in the day. I threw some parties, sure, but it was never really my thing. It's not a bad pack, but Live Enlarge was more successful for me personally. Alright, on to the third pack, and this one is a doozy. The Sims Hot Date. Easily one of my favorite Sims 1 expansions. This one was a game changer. For the first time ever, you could actually go somewhere with your Sims. Specifically, you could go to the downtown neighborhood. Here there are multiple community lots to visit, including restaurants, shops, and a beach. The whole expansion has a sort of 50s American downtown vibe to it, and it's really cool. I love the diner-style restaurant and the ice cream stand especially. Oh, and I really love the hot dog cart. I also really like the amount of detail on the candy and gift stands. There's something special about that level of pre-rendered detail that is just harder to pull off in 3D games. The music in this pack also has a classic big band feel to it, and I love it. Hot Date also added the now legendary Miss Crumplebottom, whom I believe has had appearances in every main series Sims game since. And here she's really grumpy. She'll wander around and smack Sims around a bit if she sees any kind of public displays of affection. If you ask me, this lady should probably learn to avoid the downtown if it bothers her that much. This expansion also added the idea of the lifetime relationship bar that fluctuates less than the standard one, and a bunch of other features as well, like being able to finally change your Sims PJs, swimsuits, or formal wear. Overall, it's an awesome pack, and if you had to choose which Sims 1 expansion to get, which of course you don't since you get them all in the Legacy release, this is one of those that I would consider absolutely essential. Also, fun fact, I used to have all the Sims 1 expansions in their original boxes, but many years ago I got rid of them because they took up so much room. Ugh, that's still a sore subject and it pains me to talk about it. That's not the fun fact part. The fun fact is that in recent years I decided to get a few big box PC games from my childhood that I had gotten rid of. And in the case of The Sims 1, I got the base game and Hot Date. I think, and please don't quote me on this, Hot Date was the last big box release, in regards to The Sims 1 at least. And boy, I love this box, and I loved it as a kid too, and when I was rebuying stuff a few years back, I knew I just had to have this one. The screenshots and the blurbs are just fantastic. Also, I don't know about you, but sometimes I got fixated on particular screenshots or things like that, and in this case, it's this screenshot right here. I was very obsessed with it, and I don't think that this is from an included lot. It drove me crazy not having this exact location in-game as a kid, and it still does. So I recreated it and filled in some details, and here it is. It's a really cool experience that I can actually see a screenshot that's not included in-game and just recreate it for myself. That is just so awesome. But yeah, Hot Date is really good. I really love this pack. Alright, the next expansion pack is another one I really love, Vacation. As you can no doubt guess, this one is about going on vacation. And this one is a real blast for me. You have a new vacation neighborhood called Vacation Island with 3 distinct themes. A snowy mountain area, a forest camping area, and a tropical beach area. These 3 areas are pretty well realized, and this is also the closest The Sims 1 gets to having seasons. All 3 areas have lodging that you can rent to spend a few days here, but they also have camping, and in the snowy mountain, that means staying in an igloo, which is a super neat detail. In the snow, your Sims can build snowmen, snowboard on this half pipe, get on this snow slide, and just enjoy the very cozy vibes up here with Betty Yeti. The forest has a lot of nice fishing spots and an archery range, which along with the mascot NPC Archie Archer definitely gives this area a sort of Robin Hood vibe. And in the beach, your Sim can build sandcastles and play volleyball, and I really love how the beach almost has this cheap motel kind of vibe to it. Also, Marky Sharky is super cute. There's a lot more stuff to do, including this metal detector to search for treasure, and there's also these awesome carnival games. I mentioned this in the Hot Date section, but the detail on some of these pre-rendered objects is just fantastic. Your Sims earn tickets that they can spend on prizes and souvenirs that they can take back home with them. I really love this, and I'd really like to see something like this for The Sims 4. Also, I think this is the first time that The Sims got an inventory, which of course would be a pretty important returning feature in future games. There's also new winter wear, which is fun. Overall, this is a really fun pack, though not quite as groundbreaking as Hot Date was, and not as essential as Live and Large. I still really enjoy this one a lot and find myself using it as often as I can, but you know, vacations are expensive. The next expansion is The Sims Unleashed, which at first glance looks like it's all about pets, but it also adds a ton of other stuff like gardening, the expanded neighborhood in the form of Old Town that I mentioned earlier, new careers, including joining the circus, which is awesome, and of course the usual stuff like a bunch of objects and new NPCs. I actually remember playing this particular expansion a ton back in the day because I really loved the gardening. You see, back in the early 2000s, I was obsessed with Harvest Moon 64 and Back to Nature. I played those games a ton, so when The Sims added farming, I was instantly hooked. The whole expansion has a sort of New Orleans vibe to it, and I particularly enjoy W.C. Friendly, the saxophone player that shows up and starts jamming. This pack added several new families to the game that we talked about already, and a bunch of community lots right here in the neighborhood. There are, of course, the pet stores where you can get adorable little critters. You can adopt a cat or a dog, both of which have several options, though certainly not as many as the later games, and you can only get a small dog. Cats and dogs can't be directly controlled, but they have personalities and needs just like your Sims, and they can be trained and taught tricks. I remember teaching a cat to hunt garden pests that were trying to eat the crops, and you can teach dogs to pee on the crops so that you don't have to water them. Incredible stuff. There's also pet shows where your pets can earn trophies. You can get smaller pets too, like birds and reptiles, which is super cool. Now you'd think having a pet would make the game harder, but I actually find it helps a ton with the fun and social needs. at least if you have a single sim with a single pet. So that's pretty neat. Also, when I was playing, I noticed that pups can bark at the door if someone rings the doorbell, and that they can be taught to bring in the newspaper. No idea if this is in later Sims games, but I love that detail. Moving on from the pets, there's also other shops in Old Town, like the seed shop for your garden, cafes to hang out at, the voodoo shops complete with a palm reader, Miss Lucille, who can actually bring a zombie sim back to life, which is just wild. There's also this raccoon that shows up on your home lot sometimes to knock over your trash can, but he's just so darn cute. This is a fantastic pack and easily one of the best ones in my opinion. Alright, next up is Superstar, the expansion all about making your sim into a celebrity, exploring Studio Town, which has a Hollywood 1940s feel to it. I'm not sure about the year though, it's just a guess. Also, this is the first time in the game you can actually follow your sim to work and have what would later be called an active career. This was super cool at the time, and the addition of the fame mechanic made the progression through the career a little bit more interesting too. Your sim can choose to become a supermodel, actor, or singer, and each one has its own gameplay. This expansion has multiple real-life celebrity NPCs like Marilyn Monroe and Christina Aguilera. I'm sure some people love that kind of stuff, but as I mentioned earlier, the real-life people in the game are not my cup of tea. It sort of pulls me out of the world that I'm trying to immerse myself in, if that makes any sense. But it's not a huge deal, it's just a personal preference. I actually played this pack a ton back in the day, but not because I particularly love the fame and celebrity mechanics themselves. That stuff is pretty fun, don't get me wrong, but I think I just really loved being more involved in my Sims career and in how they made money. At the time, it felt like Superstar was giving us a glimpse at what work gameplay might actually look like in the future, rather than just carpooling to work. Little did we know that carpooling to work would still be a super common thing 25 years later in the series, but I digress. There's a good variety of activities to do, and some are just super funny. I particularly like doing the jingles. I've had this stuck in my head for days now. So yeah, I think Superstar is a great pack, especially if you're into the celebrity and fame stuff. I feel like there's a lot to do here. And the final pack is Making Magic, which is easily the most bizarre concept of one of the expansion packs, at least for The Sims 1. Nowadays, supernatural stuff and totally crazy themes are commonplace in the series, but before Making Magic, The Sims expansion packs were mostly grounded in real-life ideas. Sure, there was some super unrealistic stuff in the game and really wacky items and NPCs, but each pack was adding something about everyday life that felt relatable. Now, I don't know this, so this is kind of a tinfoil hat moment, but I do find it suspicious that Making Magic came out in 2003, right as Harry Potter was gaining a ton of popularity. I think between that and the fact that the game already had a bunch of weird and wacky stuff, maybe it was the inspiration for making a pack dedicated entirely to the weird and wacky stuff. So this pack, like a lot of the other ones, has its own area, which is Magic Town. I love this neighborhood, it's got a creepy carnival vibe to it, and it even has a few residential lots your sim can move into, which makes it pretty unique for The Sims 1. To move into the houses though, your sims will have to have a ton of magic coins, which you get for doing all sorts of magic-y things around Magic Town. Now I feel like I've been saying the word magic too much. Ugh, but anyway, to be honest, I don't think I've ever moved a sim into one of these houses. I don't think I ever had nearly enough magic coins. This is, by a wide margin, my least played pack of the original Sims game. I definitely played it though, and I remember as a kid really wanting to get the dragon egg so I could have a little pet dragon. That was super fun. I do really enjoy some of the stuff in this pack, like this crazy roller coaster thing. I love this thing, and I don't think any other sim game has anything like it really, and it even has some variations. Also in Magic Town, your sim can do all sorts of new activities, and they can even put on shows that require various different skills to earn magic coins. This pack added a lot actually, but I'm less familiar with it. I think being the last expansion pack before The Sims 2 came out had something to do with it, but it's a solid pack if you're into the magic stuff. I particularly like the aesthetic and the vibes, which is not surprising since I really like the vibes of pretty much all the expansions in The Sims 1. They did such a good job with the aesthetics of each one in my opinion. For me, magic is one of those things that sometimes I'm in the mood for it, so I'm glad to have it, but usually I prefer the more mundane stuff. Alright, let's talk a little about the Legacy Collection specifically. I really did not expect to see The Sims 1 and The Sims 2 get released again by EA, so for me this is a really pleasant surprise. And I'm also really happy that from the minute I installed this game on Steam, it just worked. It loaded up and it functioned right out of the box. Now, reading some stuff online, that doesn't seem like it's everybody's experience, which makes sense. Every PC is different and your mileage may vary. And my experience wasn't exactly perfect either. The game worked and functioned, but the resolution situation was a little bit funny. Now, as someone who regularly plays old PC games on a modern rig, I'm no stranger to tweaking settings and dealing with resolution stuff. So I did some playing around with my desktop resolution and I thought I'd share my findings. So I tried running the game at 2560 by 1440 resolution and it looks great, honestly. The neighborhood screen looks a little funky because there's an unnecessary black border, but it's still very playable. And I didn't have to squint to see stuff, so that's lovely. I also tried 800 by 600 and that looked great to me. The black border around the neighborhood is gone, which is fantastic, and the game still looks good. You can get really zoomed in too, which is really nice. However, it doesn't look quite as sharp as the 2560 by 1440. And of course, it's a 4:3 aspect ratio instead of a 16:9, so it's not as great for a widescreen monitor. But sometimes playing these older games in a 4:3 ratio feels better anyway. I actually have a previous version of The Sims 1 up and running on my computer from before these releases, which, yes, was a pain in the butt to set up, and I run that at 800 by 600, and the two look, to me at least, indistinguishable from each other. My monitor is actually an ultra-wide 3440 by 1440, so I decided to try that out, and lo and behold, it works and it looks fantastic. It probably won't look great here on YouTube, but it looks really good. But also, it's just really bizarre seeing The Sims 1 running in ultra-wide, so I really got a kick out of that. Unfortunately, 1920 by 1080, which if I had to guess, I would say is probably the most widespread resolution people use, is probably my least favorite resolution to run this at. The neighborhood screen here is even more shrunk than the 2560 by 1440, and the UI is just tiny. I wouldn't say it's unplayable unless you have a really hard time with small UIs. But yeah, hopefully they'll fix this in a future patch. If you have this issue, I recommend trying to run it at 800 by 600 since to me, that looks pretty dang good, even if you do lose out on the widescreen. I also had the game crash on me once, but I've played for about 22 hours now, so I don't think that's too bad given that this is a pretty old game. And while I'm recording, I'm alt-tabbing constantly, and if you play old games, you know that alt-tabbing can have some serious effects on old games, so not too bad. Overall, I'd say it's a pretty solid release. I realize that everybody's experience is going to be different, but my experience has been pretty good. As long as you're clear that this is not a remake or a remaster, just a port of an old game, I think it's pretty good. And it's probably how I'll be playing The Sims 1 from now on. So is The Sims 1 worth playing today? I don't know, I really like it. I played it a lot as a kid and this is very nostalgic for me, but also I think the game really holds up. I think if you're okay with some old game jank, it's a pretty compelling experience. I do feel like The Sims 1 is sort of the black sheep of the main series, weirdly enough, seeing as how it's the first game. I just think that the personality of the game and its atmosphere is really different from the rest of the games in the main series. And maybe this is just me, but I think between the art style and the isometric view, I feel like The Sims 1 feels more like a dollhouse where you use your imagination more, and The Sims 2 and later games feel more like life simulators that are there to simulate living families in Sims and their day-to-day. Does that make sense to anyone else? I don't know. It just feels different. As a kid, I was always fascinated by the concept of like home building and decorating. I remember even trying out those architecture or interior design computer programs from the time. I'm not sure which one, but I remember it was really hard to use, and luckily The Sims came to the rescue. So yeah, I'm really happy to have both The Sims 1 and The Sims 2 re-released digitally, and I feel like I'll be playing them a lot more now that they're so easily accessible. And if you've made it this far, I want to give you my extra special thanks for listening to me go on and on about The Sims. Also, if you liked the video, make sure you hit the like button. That's the only way you can communicate to me that you enjoyed it. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button. That's the only way I can communicate with you when I put out a new video. Now we're just going to relax over here in the neighborhood and enjoy some wonderful vibes here in The Sims. Thanks for watching.